Think back 30 years ago to the state of technology then, the TRS-80 computer, the Commodore computer. There were things 30 years ago that, of course, hadn't even been imagined, much less invented. So now think ahead 30 years. What could technology bring? What could it change in our lives for better or worse? What will the next 30 years hold? Let's find out from the editor of Megatech, a collection of essays on technology in 2050. Please welcome Daniel Franklin.
So hello, and great to be with you. Great to be back here. It's a fantastic day here at Imagine Solutions. It's my third time with you, and I know from my previous experience it's just a wonderful event, and I'm very happy to be back. Now, my task is something that, as Tyler sort of intimated there, would seem to be absolutely impossible. How can you begin to imagine the technology 30 years ahead? Here, the phone in my pocket, the iPhone, was invented just 11 years ago. We didn't imagine that really you could be carrying around really the entire knowledge of that human beings have in your pocket, and all the possibilities it have. So how can you begin to think 30 years ahead? Well, what I did was to think about inviting some really smart people, 20 of them, to give their view of the future and to start thinking about the ways, the drivers of technology over the coming years. So what I'm going to do today is take you through a few of their thoughts, and then we're going to have a little go at one of the sort of test driving, one of the techniques for looking into the future, and hopefully take a look at something that I know is on many people's minds. What is the future of jobs with this great technological change? So here's the first thing. If you look at what is it about the state of science today that will influence how technology develops in the coming years. So here's Frank Wilczek. He's a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and the question I put to him today is, what is it about physics that will influence technological change over the next 3 decades? And what he says, this is his central insight that you see here. We have today accurate, complete equations adequate to provide the foundations of nuclear physics, materials science, chemistry, and all possible forms of engineering. And what he is saying is the state of physics has reached the point where you can do a lot more through these equations, in essence through calculation, rather than through experimentation. And the impact of that means that it can go a lot faster. You can apply very powerful computing to these problems of technology, and you get development, you get change a lot faster. So that's physics. Physics has reached that state of maturity where you can proceed through technological innovation and invention much more quickly. What about biology? Another really important science, and something that is going to, in my view, be the real driver of change over the coming decades. This is Rob Carlson, a brilliant biotech expert and an entrepreneur. And he talks about the change in sequencing of DNA and how sequencing productivity has improved hyper-exponentially. Bioengineering is presently an exercise in hacking an inherited complex system without a decent instruction manual. Massive investment will be applied to alleviate that ignorance over the next 30 years. So you're all familiar, say, with Moore's law of this incredible doubling of efficiency every 18 months or so in the computing area that has driven the computing revolution. What Rob Carlson is saying is something very similar, perhaps even more powerful, is happening in biology. The massive improvements in efficiency of sequencing DNA is going to start to provide keys to unlock great secrets of bioengineering, medicine, material science. It's going to be very, very powerful. And what he's saying, over the next 30 years, we're not at the state of physics, which has these equations. We're at an earlier stage, but an incredible era of discovery ahead. So a third way you can start to peer into the future is always a good idea: follow the money. So this is Anne Winblatt, who's a very well-known venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. And she has followed wave after wave, and this is the way she describes it, waves of technological investment. And she says that each wave of computing has been stronger, almost exponentially so, experiencing a multiplier effect on the previous ones, and the pace of growth of new companies coming ashore has also accelerated dramatically. So the way she says is that technological investment starts with many, many companies way out to sea, lots of companies going very deep, but you're not aware of them yet. They gradually come into shore. By the time they come into shore, and this can take 10 years or so, you have only a few companies that have survived, but those companies tend to be very big, very powerful ones that have a big influence. So the latest wave, she describes it as the seventh wave of innovation in the software and in the electronics area, is in AI and in quantum computing. And it's going to take a while to fully mature, but they're going to come ashore, and come the middle of the next decade, you're going to start to see new, enormous and powerful companies forming. And these are more powerful than the ones in the past, and each wave has built on the previous one. So what you're getting a picture through all these various perceptions is of a speeding up and a growing force of technological change. Now, here's the final sort of little way of looking at the future that I'd like to tell you about. This is Tom Standage, who's a colleague at The Economist. He says he has a toolkit for peering at the tech future that has 3 tools in it. First of all, lessons of history. You look to the past to see what might happen in the future. So, for example, if you think of something that's on many people's minds at the moment, driverless cars, you might look to the previous example of great technological change in personal transportation, where you had horses being replaced by horseless carriages, today's cars in effect. And many of the same sorts of questions arose. Would it be safe? How do you build the infrastructure? What happens to all the employment of all the people who looked after the horses? They're going to be out of work. What's this transition, and how fast does it happen? Secondly, edge cases from the present, basically trend watching. There's this famous quotation from William Gibson, science fiction writer: "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." So that means that technological change doesn't come fully formed overnight. It takes a while to filter through. So if you know where to look, if you're smart about it, you can start to see tomorrow's technology today. And then finally, the third element in the toolkit, science fiction. Why is science fiction useful? Well, partly because it helps people to think through. Often the film or the book has thought through the ethical and the moral dimension of technological change to the extent that the techies themselves don't. So what happens when the computers run our planet? What happens when we colonize other planets? What happens when we can manipulate genomes to the extent that you produce designer babies? What are the consequences of that? Science fiction can help us think that through. And the other reason is that a lot of technological wizards are actually science fiction fans. So they start to try and put into practice in true life what they've seen in the film or read in the book. So anyway, let's apply this toolkit to something, as I mentioned, which I think is uppermost in many people's minds, the world of work. This was a cover from The Economist a while back on the great changes in the workforce that are on their way and what it means for us all. So let's start by taking Tom's toolkit, lessons from the past, and we can see that actually at a certain level there's nothing new about great changes to the jobs market and the jobs that people do because of technology. This is the move from farming to industry, the agricultural share of the labor force, first of all in Europe and then in the United States. You can see, of course, it went way down because of the Industrial Revolution. It shrank to just about 2% of the workforce today. Many people shifted from farms to other occupations. And then more recently, we've had, since the Second World War, really, a huge shift from manufacturing to services. And services have gone up from under half of what people of occupation, of employment, to over 2/3 here in the United States. So these great shifts are nothing new. It doesn't mean that it's simple, or it's not disruptive, or it's not potentially very painful. And there are reasons to believe that this time poses special challenges because of the nature of very, very smart machines and artificial intelligence. Nevertheless, the lessons of history are going to be important to understand and to put the coming shifts in context. And then we will look at these edge cases, these trends from the present, trend watching. So here are just a few ideas for the types of jobs that you can already see starting to happen now that may become more important in the future. So here's one, bot wranglers. The whole world of bots did not exist a few years ago. Now it's starting to become very common. You might well be speaking to a bot when you ring your airline or your, some customer service thing. A lot of work behind this, a lot of employment behind this. Then there's drone technicians. There's the world of drones. I mean, you're all very familiar with military drones. Some of you may have own a drone that you use for taking pictures or for personal use. In between those two, there's a vast world of commercial drones that is used and going to be used increasingly for everything from monitoring disaster areas, some of the sorts of things that we were watching just now. Drones can be very handy. Or monitoring environmental, that's used for monitoring poachers in Africa, building sites which can be hard to access, a lot of drones used in agricultural tech farming and so on. All this is a vast area for employment. Didn't exist a few years back. The people who fly the drones, program the drones, make the drones, enormous economy. Virtual fashion designers. People are going to be needed to make you look beautiful in the virtual world just like the real world. I was curious to see the other day that there was actually a controversy over whether it was okay to wear fur in virtual fashion as well as in real life. So this stuff is very serious. Indoor farmers. 2050, we're going to be 10 billion people on the planet. We're going to need new farming techniques. New types of farming is already starting to happen. You have indoor farms, vertical. Forget the farmer in Wellington boots going out into the field. This is no natural light, not a photon wasted, and using water rather than soil to cultivate, and making vegetables very close to the cities where more and more of humanity lives. And then finally, another example, synthetic tissue engineers in the medical sphere. You're going to have a lot of medical conversations later on today, but this is already here, starting to produce almost replacement body parts, and this is going to be a growing area of growing industry, if you like, with various pieces in this supply chain. So that's just edge cases from the present, and then for my final look at the future, we have the science fiction bit, and I've invented a few companies of the future based on the sort of ideas that are emerge from the contributors to this book, of the types of companies that might dominate the world in 2050. So unfortunately, none of them exist, so you can't invest in them. So this is not an investment tip here today. But here's the first one, driverless cars. Now, clearly, driverless cars are going to be a very big deal. But my assumption here is that it's not some new entry, some tech company that's going to just sweep everything else apart, because the existing expertise of the famous motor companies is going to be important too. So this envisages a merger. You know that Google or Alphabet's driverless car division is called Waymo. Take that and take VW, one of the big existing car companies, and you get Waymo, the driverless car champion of the future. Oishi Farms, this is the company that uses some of this very smart farming technology. I imagine this, Oishi is the Japanese for delicious. So this is a company in Japan that gets concerned by the shortage of fish in the oceans and starts to produce lab-grown fish based on cell culture, not on real live fish, to satisfy the demand for sushi, and then gets very big in all other forms of lab-grown meat and other advanced forms of farming. DKB is known as Doctor Knows Best. This is, you'll hear again more about medicine, but this is the company that has all the taps into all the medical records of everybody on the planet, integrates it most effectively, and gives you the best possible diagnosis, interprets the data very well from the test. So you're going to be asking to see your computer, not your doctor, in future. Data bank, we say often that if coal powered the economy in the 19th century, oil in the 20th, data is going to power the economy in the 21st century. So the company that integrates this and has a responsible keeping of your data is onto a big winner. Cowboard Chemicals is going to be producing all sorts of new materials through biotechnology, ranging through sort of microbreweries, fermentation plants, going through the prairies, but with computers, not with cows. Call them cowboys. And then finally, this one will sound familiar, Cyborg, Feynman, and Botman. Sounds like a firm of lawyers, indeed is a firm of lawyers, but of course it's using artificial intelligence as well as human intelligence to come to the best arguments and look up the best precedents in your cases. So there you are. That is Megatech. That is the world, a glimpse into the world of technology in 2050. And I look forward to picking up these themes and discussing it with you during the breaks here today. Thank you very much indeed.